Happy post-holidays. Hockey is almost back. Well, if you're watching the World Juniors, you might be watching Braden Yeager, but for the rest of us, the NHL is just about to start off, and the Jets are back in action this coming Saturday. Find out who they line up against on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, like I said, the Jets are finally coming back into action this coming weekend. And you know what? They're going to be taking on the Ottawa Senators. And I know a lot of people have probably laughed at the Sens, thinking that this team is the same as it was at the start of the season. But this current iteration of Ottawa, especially about 2 months into the season, is looking real different. This team is starting to really come into its own, and I would actually argue that this team might be one of the best and hottest the Jets have faced in the past couple of weeks. This Sens team is 8-0 in their last 10, so yeah, this squad, absolutely not a pushover, and when you look at who the Ottawa Senators are beating, make no mistake, this is going to be a really tough test, and I think the Jets are going to have to bring their A game for what should be a very fun Saturday evening outing. We'll chat about how the Sens are going to line up and some interesting observations from their recent opponents in just a little bit, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started right now. Now, like I said, Ottawa has been on a bit of a winning streak recently. They are not really in the top flight of the Atlantic yet. They're still in the fifth spot, but when you look at the top of the Atlantic and where they are, they're only behind by about 8 points, and they do have a couple of games in hand on the upper three teams: Florida, Toronto, and Boston. So there's really no reason to think that the Sens, if they continue to improve and continue playing the way that they have been the past, I would say 3 or 4 weeks, no real reason to think that they can't pull into a playoff spot. They look really good recently, and I think that suggests the Jets are in for a much tougher opponent than they might have been at the start of the season. Now, the one advantage Winnipeg will have is that Ottawa's away form has not been great this year, but make no mistake, given how the Sens have been the past couple of weeks, really not a team that you can sleep on. Now, they have lost a couple of games in their past 8. Don't get me wrong, they've lost to the Oilers, and they did lose to the Islanders recently, but they've beaten the Hurricanes, they've beaten the Pens, the Kraken, the Canucks, the Flames, the Ducks, the Preds, and the Red Wings. So you look at a lot of those opponents, and Carolina's really good. The Penguins recently have been a top contender after having a really abysmal start. The Kraken are okay. The Canucks are a pretty tough opponent to beat, and the Flames are certainly no slouch. Maybe Calgary hasn't exactly been the best opponent this year, but considering what expectations were for the Flames, they have certainly been a tougher out than I think a lot of people were expecting. So Ottawa, really tough opponent, and one that I think will push the Jets probably to their limit. This Sens team has been offensively very ambitious, and when you look at the way that their top 9 is arranged, it makes a little bit of sense why they've been finding a lot of recent success. Up front, they've got Tkachuk, Stützle, and Giroux on the first, Reinhart, Norris, and Batherson on the second, Cousins, Pinto, and Gregg on the third, and then Gregor, Ostapchuk, and Gaudette on the fourth. And if Gaudette sounds familiar, that is Adam Gaudette. You've probably followed the fact that he's been shooting like 40% to start the year. He just seems to be on one of those random shooting benders that occasionally, bottom 6 players have, and they score like 15, 20 goals, and then they don't get heard from again. So interesting little run for him. I would imagine that his tenure on the fourth line is probably suggesting that the shooting percentage might finally start to be coming down a bit. On defense is where things are fairly interesting. Their left side, I would say, is really good, and the right side is a little bit of a work in progress. They've got Shabbat and Jensen on the first, Sanderson and Hamonic on the second, and Klevin and Bernard Docker on the third. In net is where I think things get very interesting. This team is obviously dealing with some injuries. Perron is out. Zub has been out for a while. And there's a chance that Linus Ullmark is also, maybe going to miss this game. I would expect him to be in. If not, his current backup is Marilainen, who is somebody I'm not familiar with at all. Anton Forsberg is injured, so maybe he comes back and is healthy enough for Saturday. But I would assume let's just game plan to have Ullmark in net. Ullmark has been really good for the past couple of weeks. He had a rough start to the season, but since then, things have really turned around. On the year, he's already at a .915, which is considerably above league average, and he's looking more and more like the guy who won the Vezina. This is, obviously one of their big acquisitions. Linus has been one of the really bright spots on a team that, for Buffalo past couple of years has been in dire straits. Then Ullmark moved to the Bruins and really killed it there. And now, he was Ottawa's big acquisition, and now they have signed him to a 4-year big contract. And so, the first couple of weeks, not so great. Since then, his past several games have been lights out. And I would expect him to continue that. I think the Jets are going to be in for a really tough opponent. His last 5 games, he did have one game under 900, but the rest are 2 shutouts and a 938 and a 926. So, yeah, not really expecting to be able to get too many goals against him. But hey, all that said, I think Winnipeg's power play is really where the Jets are going to make, the most of it. I'm curious to know how Winnipeg's 5v5 offense is, right? This Sens team is fast, they're mobile, and I think the Jets are going to want to really apply pressure and keep the Sens from getting a lot of pressure built up, through those line changes and stuff. If you can hem Ottawa in, you have a chance to break them down. Defensively and on the PK, it's not like they're locked down and shut down, so for the Jets, if you can find a way to really disrupt a lot of their 5v5 flow, that will help immensely because the Jets' power play is more than capable of cutting up just about anyone. Doesn't matter if it's Ullmark in net, doesn't matter who's on defense or on the PK unit. The Jets have the absolute firepower to rip through literally anyone in the league. That is how good the power play is. It is almost automatic at least 1 to 2 times a game. So for the Sens, they're going to have to basically avoid taking penalties, and that's going to be difficult against a Jets team that likes to grind on the corners and that likes to, occasionally force some mistakes along the walls. If you have a stray stick or if you trip somebody, the Jets will absolutely take advantage, and I think it'd really be important for the Jets to get the early goal. Get the crowd going, put the Sens on the back foot. Both of these teams right now have been riding, I would say, much better turns in form the past month or so. It'll be interesting to see how this comes out because I think Ottawa might legitimately have a reasonable shout to be maybe in current form, not looking at the record, maybe the second best team in Canada next to the Jets. I know the Leafs fans are going to lose their mind, but I think given how Ottawa has played recently and how good their offense has been, I kind of put them in the upper echelon of teams at even strength. But again, that's not always translated to the record this year. There's a reason that they're 18-14-2. But I think if they continue to turn things around, it's only game 34 for them right now. It'll be 35 on Saturday. And at that point, you're going to start to see maybe some of those good habits that they've been keeping and curating turn into, a much more playoff-looking team. So really tough opponent for the Jets. I still think the Jets come out on top. I'm predicting a 4-3 win. Let me know your score predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at @LoVingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a short bit, I also thought it'd be worth taking a brief look at both the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. We're going to do a brief standings update. And then, tomorrow's episode I thought would be a good time to do some mid-season report cards as we are getting to that point with the Jets. And I think I can give out some early letter grades. Some might be surprising. Some might not be too shocking. But of course, let's take a look at how the rest of the league is doing first. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to, paying surprise fees and hidden charges. You add a ticket to your cart, and then you go to checkout, and you find out that the price that you think you're paying isn't that at all. It's quite a bit more, sometimes 2 to 3 times as much as you thought you were supposed to pay, and nobody likes that. Game Time wants you to enjoy the holidays together, right? And they don't want to force you to get hit with surprise fees or weird charges. They offer an option to toggle called all-in pricing that lets you see everything up front so that you're not hit with surprise fees. And they even offer a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only the best deals on amazing seats. And of course, Gametime already shows you seat views, and they come back with the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. If you are tired of running the gamut of all of these services that just want to screw you out of a good time, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting a little bit about, current standings updates for the league coming out of the holiday break. We're about to enter a very busy portion of the season right until, the Four Nations face-off in February. As much as I try to get myself psyched about that, I've had trouble being enthusiastic about a mid-season tournament. To me, it just feels like a good chance for some of our best players to get injured. So crossing fingers that the Jets come out of that unharmed. It wouldn't be a big deal if we weren't sending big representatives, but of course, Hellebuck, Morrissey, guys like that, Connor, just not really players that you can afford to lose for any specific amount of time. So let's just cross our fingers for a healthy, positive outcome, and hopefully, maybe a couple of our guys come away with some sort of an award. But in terms of the battle for the Stanley Cup, obviously teams are still jockeying for playoff positions, and it's been hard to get a read on who's really been the best. And I think that really applies to the East this year. If you look at the Atlantic Division, right now, you've got the Panthers, the Leafs, and the Bruins occupying the first three spots, but you've also got Tampa Bay and Ottawa very much in the hunt. They're only a couple of points behind third place, and we all know that the Bruins are not particularly good. I know that their record looks relatively strong, but if you actually watch how the Bruins have played this year, they're just a very mediocre team. I feel like the goaltending and some of their top scorers have sort of masked how, I would say, shallow that team's depth is. But so far, they've managed to string it along. I just don't think it's the kind of squad that really gives you a lot of confidence come the playoff time, right? Maybe Swayman really locks things down and they suddenly become a great team. But when you look at the amount of dangerous opportunities that they give up and how bad the PK has been, I would not really want to put all of your eggs in the basket. I think for the Atlantic, right, assuming that Ottawa's turnaround continues, I would say the Sens are probably up there with the Panthers and the Leafs in terms of scariness. In fact, I'd say Ottawa's probably right there with the Panthers. Again, if their continued turnaround is consistent, right? And I would say, a lot of folks are going to probably express surprise, but the Sens offense, especially when you look at the underlying numbers, they have been generating loads of dangerous chances. They are generally outcreating their opponents by a pretty good margin. It just hasn't always gone past the opposing goalie, and a lot of times they're getting outscored because, Allmark and the PK earlier were struggling a bit. But seems like things have really stabilized recently, and if that's true, the Atlantic doesn't really have a lot of top-end teams. You've got squads that are kind of like the Bruins and Lightning, where they're still hanging around. Tampa Bay seems to have been really on a bit of an offensive tear recently, and so I could see them moving up in the division. But I feel like Ottawa maybe has the trend to be really successful and get further up into the top three. So will be a really interesting battle. Very curious to know where Tampa Bay ends up. Tampa has also played considerably less than everyone else just because of the hurricane situation. So we'll have to see how they make use of their 2 to 4 games in hand on the rest of that division. At the bottom, you've got the Habs, the Wings, and the Sabres. And yeah, at this point, they're just really hoping that something turns around. The Sabres probably need to blow it up. The Wings, the Yzer plan has completely fallen apart. And Montreal, I think that they did expect to be bad, but probably not this bad. So, yeah, even Patrick Laine can't save that team. But hey, if it leads you to some top end draft picks or a lotto pick, you probably aren't complaining in the end. Out in the Metro, I would argue right now is really one of the strongest divisions in the league. Probably right there with the Central, maybe even better than the Central. You've got the Devils, the Caps, and the Canes all vying for the top spots. And right now, New Jersey's currently in first. They have played more games just because of the Global Series, and so I would say that they're probably going to settle around second by the end of the season. But Washington and Carolina have really been fighting for this 2 and 3 seed. And it's really been an interesting thing to see Washington have a very well balanced offense, right? The Caps aren't a team that's like built to have elite game breakers in the same way that, say, like, a Colorado or at times a Vegas has been. They're more like the Jets in some ways. And that makes me very interested to see how far they go in that side of the bracket. They don't have maybe the prime Ovechkin, Backstrom's gone. Oshie's not really playing anymore. So this new young Caps team that's really youth-centric on top of a couple of big veteran players is really, really doing well, and something that is an interesting story, maybe one that hasn't been talked about a lot. But also in that mix, of course, Carolina, they're always just good. I mean, you talk about them being a regular season juggernaut. There's really not much to ever doubt there. It's when they get to the postseason that you sort of wonder how much of their regular season success is going to translate. They've hit some rockier shores the past 10 games, but you sort of expect them to just be good, generally speaking, right? Even when they have a bit of like a 500 streak or perhaps even a bit under that, eventually they get their crap together. They end up in one of the top seeds in the East, and they're just a real pain to deal with. So, fun team, but probably hoping for maybe a deeper run than some of the past couple of years. Then there's Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is hovering right above 500 right now, but they've been on a much improved streak the past couple of weeks. That has tapered off a little bit heading into the holiday break, but they just are the perennial team that will not die. And it's very interesting to see if they can crack maybe that third seed in the Metro. I think that's going to be a little too hard for them with, who's up there vying for the top 3 spots right now. But if they continue to play pretty well, maybe they can fight for a wild card. I don't know. This Penguins team feels like it's not deep enough to really make a great run. And in my mind, if you're Dubas, do you still sell at the deadline? I don't know. Crosby has been a little, I would say, non-committal in some ways about his future there. And, while he will probably extend again, as he always does, I don't know. This Penguins team feels like it needs a bigger shift change, and that might mean biting the bullet and cutting your ties. But elsewhere in the division, I think a lot of these teams below them really don't have many hard decisions. You've got Columbus, Philadelphia, the Rangers, and the Islanders. All of them probably need to start jettisoning some talent here over the next couple of months. The Rangers especially, I think, are probably looking to retool and try and get this team back into a competitive state. I don't think they expected to be this bad this year, but it's really just blown up in their faces. So if you're a Rangers fan, I have no idea what's going on with your team. I don't know why everything has seemingly fallen apart. I don't know if the locker room toxicity stuff is true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, considering I had them ranked as one of the teams that I thought might be competing for a title this year out on the eastern side of the bracket, it's really just fallen apart at the seams. And so, the Jets may be making some trade calls there pretty soon. Filipino's interesting. Keandre Miller's of interest. I mean, there's guys out there that the Jets might be into, especially if you're looking for some depth talent. But, in terms of what the expectation was coming into the season and what the Rangers have delivered, it's been anything but a happy tale to write. And like Columbus and Philadelphia, you sort of expected them to be in this range. The Islanders, I mean, it's time to just cut your ties there. I mean, how much leash is Lou really going to get with this team? He keeps keeping the squad together, and I just don't really see the value in what the Isles have tried to pull together. It's a bad team. There's really limited offense. At some point, you've got to, just admit that the team just isn't good enough to compete at this level and maybe start moving some bigger contracts. I sort of wonder what happens with Matt Barzal. He's been, a standout for them for many years, but he's had some seasons where he's been a bit injured, and, his production has really kind of tanked because that team's offense in general just seems to be really in the ditches. But I don't know. Lou's going to try and scrounge out something, I'm sure, and try to keep this team as long as possible. But all I can say is I would not set high expectations for them going forward. So, yeah, if you're looking for the teams to watch out east, here's my, I guess, three. You've got the Panthers, you've got the Caps, and I think the Devils. And then, everyone else I would say is really in the mix for some fun. But maybe there's a cosmetic or maybe a little more than cosmetic, maybe a structural flaw that's going to hurt them in the postseason. Tampa Bay might be one of the most interesting to follow for the next few weeks. We'll have to see how they, again, make use of those games in hand. But yeah, the East feels, for as much as I've identified a couple of big teams, still very wide open. And that's also the case for their compatriots in the West. If anyone can tell you that, it's probably us as Jets fans. The West has been a completely wild time. Very hard to know who stands at the top outside of Winnipeg right now. We'll chat about who's really impressed so far and who hasn't in just a brief moment. Before we get too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. And if you're following the Ravens like I am, you're probably expecting a Lamar touchdown, maybe 3 next week against the Browns. The Ravens will still be playing for everything, playing for the division title. And maybe you're also monitoring the situation with Pickens and Wilson out with the Steelers because they'll also be fighting for a title, and they absolutely must win out in order to have a shot at reclaiming the AFC North crown. But whatever it is, whoever you're following, whether you're looking for touchdowns or points or wins, whatever it is, all you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about, some of the recent standings updates coming out of the break. And if the East was very complicated, the West isn't looking much easier to figure out either. The Central Division remains probably the second best division in hockey right now. They are just loaded with talent. You've got teams that are starting to put 2 and 2 together after rougher starts. You've got teams like Winnipeg that have basically been near the front of the pack from start to finish, right? Outside of like a 10-game stretch on the road that was really rough, Winnipeg has really never dropped out of the top spots in the Central. And now they're back not only in first in the Central, but also in the West. And so Saturday's game against the Sens is a really good chance for the Jets to continue to add to that ridiculous lead. This team has honestly impressed, I think, beyond all expectation. It would take a monumental collapse of proportions we've probably never seen for them to somehow miss, a playoff spot, right? If they were to go like 500 the rest of the way, they'd still end up with something like 97 points, which is just unbelievable. I don't know that I would have ever imagined that to be possible, but to put it lightly, this team is really feeling it. I think the Jets have started to pull together some really good 5v5 performances the past couple of games too. There were some, again, mediocre stretches coming out of that road trip, but I'm hoping and really crossing fingers that things are starting to fall into place again and that the Jets are going to start playing more consistent hockey, especially against top teams. Those playoff opponents that you're going to start seeing over the next few weeks, those are the ones that you really want to make a statement against before you go into the postseason run in April. So lots of work to do, but, so far so good. And, back to, a crazy record, just 36 games in. Not far behind them, you've got a couple of names that really aren't going to surprise you. Minnesota and Colorado are really hot on Winnipeg's heels. Still not too close in the standings department necessarily, but 5 points for Minnesota, probably not as crazy of a gap to try and close. Colorado is probably not going to bridge that gap so quickly, but With the Avs, they don't really care, right? As long as they make the playoffs, that's really where they do their signature damage. And so, watch out for them if they make the postseason again. They're always a frustrating team, and their brand of hockey continues to be a real problem for the Jets. Not far behind Colorado, and with several more games in hand, is Dallas. The Stars have been a little up and down the past couple of weeks. Robertson isn't, shooting at his usual career 13 to 14%. And the Stars' offense and defense have just they've been a little bit, leaky, I would say. Not terribly so. And, Ottinger has maybe had a couple of bad outings the past couple of games. But generally speaking, the team has been still pretty good overall. I just feel like, maybe the record isn't quite reflective of how well they've been playing, but I would imagine that if they make the postseason like you would expect them to, they'll be very, very fierce. And, this foursome of teams in the Central might be the best top four of any division out there. So lots of talent, lots of skill, and I think it's right there with the best of the Metro teams. Maybe even better if we're being honest. And, after that, you've got Utah, St. Louis, and Nashville, and Chicago. Utah and St. Louis are probably not going to make the postseason unless something really changes. I mean, you'd probably be looking at a wild card spot. I think the Blues are an interesting longer-term bet just because of Montgomery, right? Montgomery coming in is a huge coaching change and really a big acquisition for them. So I would say after the season, keep an eye out for them when he's had more time to work his tactical instructions in and maybe make a few trades. But outside of that, would not expect them to make a lot of noise during this postseason. But on the Pacific side of things, you've got some interesting results recently. Vegas is still in first, which is not shocking, but then the Oilers have managed to get themselves into second. Edmonton, they must be doing that thing again. We all knew that they had a bad start, and you just didn't believe it because you knew that eventually their offense would turn things around, and that's exactly what's happened. The Oilers are back in the top of the division. They're going to be a pain in the butt, if they make the postseason. I don't think that they'll make the Stanley Cup finals again necessarily, but they're still going to have a deep team and an offense that, you put McDrysaitel together for a shift or two. It's just going to be a huge pain. So let's just hope that they get bounced early because I'm tired of seeing the Oilers doing well in the playoffs. After that, you've got LA and Vancouver, both having pretty solid seasons. I think the Kings are still probably a little too close to the sun for my liking. I feel like they've maybe accelerated their rebuild or whatever a little faster, and I'm not quite sure that the fruits have necessarily borne out the way that they were expecting, but still a very solid team. They don't give you a lot, and seemingly they've scored a fair few goals themselves. So this team, a real pain in the butt. I'm sure the Jets meetings with them are not going to be fun. They always seem to have our number, so we'll have to see how that goes. Vancouver, they're a little mixed recently. The last 10 games have been all over the place, but I still think that, despite the dip in shooting percentage and, some of the injury misfortune with Demko later in the season, they're going to be a bigger story. I guess what happens with Pettersson and Miller, by the trade deadline is really going to decide what this team's future is, right? Pettersson might be on the block. Miller has been, on and off in rumors from stuff about off-ice issues and who knows what. So a lot to unpack there. There may be some real turmoil inside the room that's going to shape the rest of their season. After that, you've got Calgary, Seattle, Anaheim, and San Jose. The only team that's really within touching distance of the postseason is Calgary. And I'm not sure if they really want to make the playoffs. I feel like they still need a couple of big, prospect pickups. They've been drafting really well, but they still need a centerpiece option. So I wonder if they sell by the trade deadline or if they kind of do the Winnipeg thing of having, maybe an abbreviated playoff run with some home revenue, and then you get a mid-round pick and try to work off of that. So, plenty of options for the Flames. I would still probably envision them to be sellers, but hey, maybe they do something crazy and try and, mix it up. Because once you get into the playoffs, all bets are off, right? Anything can happen in a 7-game series, and maybe you scam your way to a Stanley Cup Finals. Who knows? But curious to know which of these teams, whether it's on the East or the West, that really impress you. Drop your favorite squads outside of Winnipeg and who you're kind of keeping a close eye on as we get closer to the playoffs in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. on Twitter. But for tonight's episode, like I said, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we will give out some early and mid-season report cards and see how the Jets and perhaps the coaching staff are currently faring. But like I said, that's all the time that we have for tonight. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.